Best Team for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet will be out Sunday, December 11th at 10 a.m. Eastern / 7 a.m. Pacific, so make sure you all save the date. You're not going to want to miss this. Searching for and catching wild Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet might be the most fun it's been since, I don't know, ever? Of course, we'll all have our preferences, but in spite of some of the jankiness I've experienced in the overworld every now and then, exploring and catching still has managed to be pretty addicting. And for many players throughout the entire series, you may have become attached to some of the Pokemon you catch and use. It's inevitable, especially with the series' ongoing theme of friendship and bonding. But even sometimes when you're using a Pokemon you like, sometimes you can't avoid that maybe it's not all that great for battling compared to other choices. Making the top 10 best videos are among my favorites to do, but now you all know what's coming. What are the top 10 worst Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet? To clarify before we start off this list, the potential Pokemon that can be listed are basically anything that can be realistically used on an in-game team, and are not restricted to Pokemon introduced in Gen 9. So that is the main difference between this list and the top 10 new Pokemon you should not use. Before we start though, you guys should head over to Mystic Umbreon's Shorts, where we'll be having daily Scarlet and Violet content coming out, as well as daily Pokemon facts. After the best team goes up, I will actually be starting a brand new Scarlet and Violet series exclusively over there on Mystic Umbreon's Shorts, that I think the majority of you guys will like. Also, if you like anime and fanfics, head over to Mystic Reads, where I'm currently reading Road to be a Pokemon Master Kanto Edition, an adventure with Ash and Serena going through Kanto together. If you like anime, I'm reading through the Yaju Sanin, a Naruto fanfic. I will leave the links for both these channels in the description below and the iCard above. For our starting spot, we're starting with the type combo that one would probably expect to be in this type of list, the Ice Bug type Frosmoth. If you followed my channel for a while, you probably knew this was coming. Ice Bug isn't a boring typing, and Frosmoth does have a pleasant design. But we kind of can't go around the flaws of this Pokemon. It has one thing going for it, and it's that great base 125 special attack. Unfortunately, it doesn't really have the speed or bulk to take advantage of it as much as other Pokemon could. And being 4 times weak to Rock and Bug is pretty miserable. If it were 4 times weak to only Fire, it wouldn't feel quite as bad. But being weak to Rock with that mere 60 physical defense stat on top of that is just awful. We all know Ice Bug isn't a good combo, and it's actually a wonder that what are basically the 2 worst individual typings on a defensive level only end up being weak to 4 typings in the end. Still, I wouldn't shame anyone for using this on their team in single player runs, because again, despite the Snom syndrome at play here, it's still got a unique typing and can still be fine if able to utilize that offense. That's why for as easy as it is to pick on Frosmoth for that typing combo, it's only at number 10 and not any higher up on the list. If you want to see an example of how type combos aren't everything, look no further than at who takes our number 9 spot, Klefki. Now, before you strangle me over this, Klefki is actually a really interesting Pokemon in competitive. If this list were only that, Klefki would absolutely not be here. But for everything else outside of a very specific meta, like overall in-game playthrough and experience, Klefki's strangely even stat distribution with only an overall 470 stat distribution count makes it a bit hard to justify using over others. It takes a lot to get it offensively going, and it's not exactly a tank either. With Frosmoth, you can predict the Pokemon typing you're facing next in an NPC's rotation and take advantage with its high special attack at least. Though with Klefki, it's more about setups and utility. This isn't bad in single player with certain Pokemon, but with Klefki, this doesn't feel great when you're marathoning trainers with its not so great stats. Very low bulk and mediocre speed also doesn't help. In fact, if this Pokemon had more speed, it probably wouldn't be here at all, and would feel more like something like Jumpluff. Ironically, a Pokemon that fares much worse in competitive outside of much earlier generations. That steel fairy typing is still a great thing to have defensively though. And if you're into patient strategies, then you may actually still enjoy using this little guy outside of competitive. However, if you really want to use a steel fairy Pokemon, then you should definitely just go for a Kricketune. I will say, despite that this is a top 10 worst video, I think the fact that I've put both Frosmoth and Klefki here, they can still have a pretty sensible, perfectly fine use. And this shows there may not actually be that many Pokemon that are outright terrible in every asset, aside from some unevolved exception one could cherry pick. And in the case of Klefki, I do like that it's designed for more of a niche use overall than one can put together for a serious play, or still find a way to appreciate outside of that casually in spite of making it on my list. As you may expect, I couldn't get myself to separate Pachirisu and Dedenne for our number 8 spot for obvious reasons. Unlike Klefki, there's not much to say or note about these two, and they don't really have major uses among players outside of being really cute. Their designs are fine, albeit stereotypical Pikachu clones. If you look at their stats, their placement on this list is pretty self-explanatory. These are clearly beginner-type Pokemon without any evolutions, so there's no need to be too harsh. I mean, look at them. Why would you want to be? As far as which is the better of the two, I think for overall generic purposes, Dedenne is a little better with its higher special attack and slightly better speed. Its electric fairy typing is also going to be preferred over just plain old electric. However, Pachirisu will always have VGC 2014 under its belt. So yeah, maybe the joke's on me. And here we have a usual suspect for this type of list, Delibird. This guy has a store named after him and has a very memorable design, but yeah, this is where the list starts to get genuinely kind of bad from a gameplay point of view. Delibird is clearly meant to be more of a gimmicky mascot type of Pokemon, and you know what? That's perfectly fine. But at the end of the day, it's got a very low 330 base stat total and has a ridiculously bad signature move that's clearly a bit of a joke. We'll see how the Iron Bundle Pokemon pans out among the player base with its ridiculously high speed and special attack. Here, we have a Pokemon that wasn't great before Gen 6, but fell off even harder once fairy types were introduced. Sableye. At least in Gen 6 it was given a Mega Evolution, a pretty interesting choice to give a Mega Evolution to actually. But when it isn't able to Mega Evolve, it's just stuck with its horrible 380 base stat total. It's got some decent options in its move pool, but when your stats are this mediocre, it just doesn't mean much, especially this time around. Before recent generations, Sableye had a niche playstyle in competitive, especially against normal, fighting, and psychic types. But its potential, even in this section, is getting even smaller as time goes on. It's definitely a kind of Pokemon that can use some kind of held item or something to make it more viable again. Here we have a new Pokemon, Squawkabilly. At first, it seems like it could be worse. Your typical bird with no evolution that probably exists more for aesthetic or casual world building. This has been a thing since Gen 1. You see its stat distribution and could indeed be a lot worse. That 92 speed and attack means it can do some decent enough damage. But man, that move pool, dude. It's one thing if it had a hollow move pool but had some big time offensive stats or something, but it's got a mediocre move pool and maybe the most generic move pool out of any Pokemon in Gen 9. Our previous entries usually had some type of interesting use history or potential gimmick, or at least simply weren't that bad. Unfortunately, Squawkabilly just has nothing going on, putting it in the middle of this list. But hey, at least it comes in a variety of colors. And here at number 4, we have one that I actually really struggled to put on this list. I'm kidding, it's Kricketune. Welcome back to another worst Pokemon list, my friend. It's actually hard to find new things to say sometimes about some of these poor guys that make it several times into these types of lists, especially when there are other channels that have definitely given Kricketune a hard time over its horrible stats. With an overall base stat total of 384, I'm surprised it actually even reaches a base attack stat of 85. Even if it weren't a bug type, and were, say, a fairy type, it would probably still find a way in this list without some sort of wacky gimmick. It's just another bug type that feels like it falls off right after the first gym or so, like always. It's easy to forget that this is actually an evolved form of another Pokemon too, even if that evolution comes as early as level 10. Just wait until you see our number 3 spot. Well, it looks like Kricketune has a new buddy in Spidops. This Pokemon has a slightly higher stat total, but it's instead spent on defense and special defense. They gave this thing more defense, but even less base health than Kricketune. I'm serious. It feels like a wasted attempt at trying to make this thing take more damage than a Pokemon like Kricketune. Its attack and speed are, as you can guess by now, lower. That speed in particular is just atrocious. It doesn't get any weird or fancy gimmicks either. Oh, you know what? I could be wrong. It's got the Insomnia ability. Oh boy. Now your Pokemon gets to stay fully awake as it gets destroyed by some random Spearo's peck. That is unless you used its signature move. That's right, Spidops actually has a signature move if you can believe it, Silk Trap. This move is like Protect, but lowers the attacker's speed if it makes any contact. So I guess that's a cool move that's just sitting on a Pokemon like Spidops. So I guess you can kind of delay how fast it dies. I suppose there's one maniac out there that's going to try making some type of stalling utility-based moveset with this thing that's going to try to embarrass some players. But otherwise, there's no avoiding the fact that this is just another stereotypical bug type with some really weak stats. And you know what? If I don't make any generation-based restrictions for Gen 10, is there any chance that Spidops and his friend Kricketune somehow don't make it back to this list again? Our penultimate spot is taken by a Pokemon that actually looks more impressive than previous entries on the surface, but seems to struggle about as much despite having stats that are, well, not definitely not good, but less terrible. The Pokemon we're talking about here is Sunflora, which, while expected by many people to be on this list, still feels strange to see so high up, despite literally placing it here myself. Sunflora has that sweet special attack stat sitting at 125. How could it possibly suck? Alright, it's super slow with really bad physical defense and poor bulk. It's also got a very mediocre move pool with almost no coverage options compared to other grass types. In fact, the lack of options with its moveset feels worse than its stats. Still, Sunflora can potentially hit hard enough to stay away from something. It's just so slow and frail, it's unlikely to get the chance to ever do much, even less so than Kricketune. It's unfortunate that Sunflora has just never been good throughout its entire existence, because it feels like it should have more potential, even if that wouldn't be much. But hey, it's not the worst Pokemon. At last, we're here. A Pokemon so bad that I actually forgot that it doesn't evolve into anything. At our number 1 spot is Luvdisc. You all knew this was coming. If Unknown were available, it'd probably still land ahead of this thing. It has a nice 97 speed, and nobody cares. With 30 attack and 40 special attack, you're basically throwing paper plates at your foes. What good is that? Going on about how bad Luvdisc is just seems repetitive and redundant, of course. Even if it had a better move pool, it just wouldn't be able to outweigh the horrifically bad stats of this thing. It was clearly never meant to be taken seriously, and was at least partially conceptualized for the heart skill item mechanic. Unfortunately, unless something changes, Luvdisc will always be somewhere near the top of these types of lists. And those are my picks for the top 10 worst Pokemon in Scarlet and Violet. Remember, There's nothing actually wrong with using these Pokemon if you simply like them. In fact, using any of these just for that reason is pretty in line with the themes of this series. But still, there's no denying most will agree that some of the Pokemon listed here aren't exactly the best battlers. But what do you guys think? Have you ever done a playthrough with a Pokemon like Kricketune as a pillar of your team? Are there any Pokemon you would put in your top 10 worst that didn't make it? Let me know down below, and stick around for all the new Scarlet and Violet content coming your way. Thanks for watching the video and for coming through and enjoying Scarlet and Violet with me. We've got so much content coming surrounding Gen 9 through the end of the year and beyond, including the top 10 strongest Pokemon, the best team for the games, and much more. If you're interested in more Mystic content, check out my TikTok and Mystic Umbreon Shorts YouTube channel. When we get to 5,000 subs on the channel, we're going to have a new series related to Scarlet and Violet that will be exclusive to there, so go subscribe. Also, if you're into fanfictions or Genshin Impact, check out Mystic Reads and Tevotchnary. I offer a ton of creative spoken word content over there, and I do a bunch of theories and lore videos surrounding Genshin Impact. So come join me over there at that Float Your Boat. That's all for now. Thanks again for watching, and see you next time for more Scarlet and Violet content.